Welcome to Lecture 24 of BIB201. Today's lecture is going to be finishing up the entire doctrine of angelology while finishing up the specific section of demonology and then getting into and completing Satanology. So let's pick up where we left off in the last lecture. If you remember from the last lecture, we're underneath letter E. Are some angels bad? We've already discussed the timing of their fall and the cause of their fall. Now let's discuss the result of their fall. Well, there were two main things that happened when the demons fell. Letter A was that they lost their holiness. Holiness means their purity, their separation for God. Because they rebelled against Him, they lost that aspect of their nature. Now, that does not mean that they changed in form or appearance. Again, remember, they're metaphysical spirit beings. It means that spiritually they were no longer holy. And then letter B, we find out that some are held in chains while others are free to fight against God and humans. Some of the passages that discuss this are 2 Peter 2, Jude 6, and Revelation 12. Let's look at 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. In this passage it says, "For if God didn't spare the angels who sinned, but threw them down into Tartarus, the abyss, and delivered them to be kept in chains of darkness until judgment." Now there are some, according to 2 Peter, that were so terrible that they even cast into the abyss, Tartarus, and put in chains. This is most likely a reference to that place where those demons did not want to be sent, but instead requested of Jesus to be cast into the pigs, and Jesus acquiesced. These angels are there right now and in chains until the coming judgment. And then Jude chapter 6 says, "And He has kept with eternal chains in darkness for the judgment of the great day the angels who did not keep their own position, but deserted their proper dwelling." Now, if you look at all of Jude chapters, or not Jude chapter, but Jude verse 6, there's only one chapter, then you'll know that the context around this alludes to this being the individuals, those demons that were the sons of God that saw the daughters of men and took them as wives. Now, there's a lot of debate on this, I understand, but the context of Jude actually supports that, and those angels have been locked up and kept into this prison of darkness until the day of their judgment. And then lastly, let's look at Revelation chapter 12. In Revelation chapter 12, it says that then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels also fought, but he could not prevail, and there was no place for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was thrown out, the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. He was thrown to earth, and the angels with him. So these verses show that there are some demons, fallen angels, that are held in chains right now, but there are some that are free to roam the earth and cause destruction. Now let's look at number 4. I've already alluded to this a little bit, but let's discuss the abomination after their fall. In Genesis chapter 6, it discussed that there were sons of God that saw daughters of men and took them unto themselves and had children. Well, letter A, in comparing Genesis 6 verse 4 to Job 1:6, some think that the sons of God there were fallen angels. And again, the context of 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 6 would make these the ones that are in chains until the day of judgment. But, letter B, there are also some that from the context of Genesis 4 through 6 that believe the sons of God were the godly line of Seth in Genesis chapter 4. This would mean these individuals believe that the sons of God were the godly line of Seth and the daughters of men were that ungodly line of Cain. But then letter C, there are still others that believe that since Christ declared that angels cannot have sexual relationships, that they advocate that these were literal men possessed by some fallen angels. Jesus would support this belief and theory to some extent because in Matthew 22, he said that angels do not get married and they do not have kids. Again, remember, they are spirit beings. They do not have the ability to procreate. Well, now that brings us to the last section underneath angelology, Satan. Many times this is called Satanology. And I will caution before we get into this that even as appealing as this doctrine sounds, I always like to warn individuals to not go too deep into this, because Satan is like light. He tries to attract you to him, and then us, like bugs, when we get too close, it burns us up. So we have to be careful. I will give you the biblical understanding of who Satan is and some aspects of him, but I would caution all of us to make sure we don't go too far down the rabbit hole to where we begin to actually idolize this individual. So first, let's discuss 3 errors concerning Satan. These are 3 things that individuals believe about Satan that I honestly think he is trying to trick us into believing. The first is the error of believing that there is no personal devil. He, according to the Bible, is real, and in fact, he's a sinner. 1 John 3 verse 8 says, "Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil, for the devil has been practicing sinning from the beginning." So ever since he fell, all he's been doing is perpetuating sin. So when you and I sin, we're being like the devil. The devil is real, and he is a sinner. And then letter B. Not only is he a sinner, he is a murderer and a liar. Now this verse you should remember, John 8:44, where Jesus, speaking to the Pharisees, says, "You are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, because he is the father of lies." So he is a sinner, he is a murderer, and he is a liar. And then letter C. He does possess all the elements of personality. And if you remember those 3 elements of personality, the first one is that he has intellect. In Job chapter 1, when God said, "If you considered my servant Job," Satan knew exactly who God was talking about. He is highly intelligent, not omniscient, but he is highly intelligent. Number 2, not only does he have intellect, he has emotion. In Revelation 12 verse 12 says, "Woe for the earth and for the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great anger, knowing that he has a short period of time." In Revelation 12, this is towards the end of that great period of the tribulation, when Satan is cast out of heaven and he's on the earth tormenting all of God's creation. And he knows that his time is short, so he is trying to wreak as much havoc. He is trying to wreak as much of his anger upon the earth as he can, showing that emotion that he possesses. And then lastly, number 3, he has intellect, he has emotion, and he has a will. The greatest passage that explains a part of the will of the devil is Isaiah 14. In Isaiah 14 verses 13 and 14 it says, "You, Lucifer, said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the cloud. I will make myself like the Most High." Satan says 5 times in this passage, "I will." He has a will. He has a desire of what he wants to do, and it all revolves around him. So, the first error concerning Satan is believing there is no personal devil. The second error is believing that if the devil exists, he is an ugly, Miltonic creation. Now, the idea that Satan is an ugly red monster with horns and a pitchfork came from the writings of an individual named John Milton in his book, Paradise Lost. It is a fascinating book, and a great work of art. However, it has tricked individuals for countless ages into believing the devil is an ugly red creature with horns and a pitchfork. That was just Milton's personification of Satan's actions, not trying to say his real appearance. And then lastly, number 3, the third error is believing that Satan's sole residence is in hell. The greatest passage that supports or refutes this error is in 1 Peter 5 verses 8 and 9, where it says, be sober, which means guarded, be vigilant, watchful. Why? Because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him. Peter would never have told us to be on guard for the devil if the devil was not real and if he did not actually exist on the earth instead of being in some residence of hell, which is actually another part of the error of people believing that Satan somehow is the king of hell and he enjoys it down there. Hell has been created as a place for torment of him and his fallen angels. He does not love it down there because he's never been there, and he does not control who does and does not get to go there. So now that we've talked about the three errors concerning Satan, let's talk about the names given to Satan. Well, number one, his proper name is Lucifer. And in fact, the word Lucifer means light bearer or day star. That is his real name that was given to him before the fall. In Isaiah 14 verse 12 it says, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations. Not only is his proper name Lucifer, but number two, he is called the devil. Now the word devil in the Greek means accuser, and it is the most used name to talk about Lucifer. In fact, it's used 33 times specifically for him, and used other times to talk about the other forces behind him. An example is Matthew 4 verse 1. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, the accuser, because that is one of the main jobs of the devil, is to accuse us. So his proper name is Lucifer. He is the devil. Number three, he is Satan. Now the word Satan in the Greek means accuser. And one of the most notable verses that calls him this is 2 Corinthians 11:14. In this passage it states, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Now here in this passage, it's specifically talking about false teachers whose message seems good, but it actually is evil. That is Satan's MO. He disguises himself as something that seems so good, but in fact is so evil. Now this word Satan, adversary, is also used of Peter in Matthew 16. But when Peter is called this by Jesus, he is not being called Lucifer. The general definition is more preferred that basically Jesus is saying, Peter, if you're not for me, you're against me. Because Jesus had just declared that he would die at the hand of sinners. And Peter said, I will not let that happen. So Jesus basically tells him that if he doesn't let it happen, then he is his adversary. Then number four, he is Belial. So his name, proper name is Lucifer. He's called the devil. He's called Satan. Then he's also called Belial, and Belial means worthless. In 2 Corinthians 6:15 it says, what accord has Christ with Belial? Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? Jesus has nothing in common to hang out with Belial, the worthless one. Which I really like that one, because he is worthless. So therefore, what portion do we have to be identified with unbelievers? Now remember, the context here, Paul is not saying we should not impact and help and minister to unbelievers. He's trying to point out that there should be a difference between the believing world and the unbelieving world, because Jesus is different than that worthless one, Lucifer. And number five, the last name given to Lucifer is Beelzebub. And Beelzebub literally translates as chief of devils or prince of demons. This name and this title that's given to Satan is found in Matthew 12 verse 24. In this passage it says, but when the Pharisees heard it, they said, it is only by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, that this man cast out demons. Now if you notice here, it says Beelzebul or Beelzebub. They both are acceptable translations of this. It has to do with the endings of the names in the Greek. There's different endings for them. So Beelzebul or Beelzebub. Either way, When the Pharisees find out that Jesus is casting out demons, they accuse him of doing this because it's through the power of the prince of demons, Beelzebub. So now let's move on to letter C, titles given to Satan. There are three main titles that are given to Satan. The first is he is called the God of this world. 2 Corinthians 4 verse 4 says, "In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God." So he is called the God, little g, of this world. Not only is he called that, but number two, he is called the prince of this world. In John 14 verse 30, it says, "I will no longer talk with you, for the ruler," literally prince of this world, "is coming. He has no claim on me." So he is called the God of this world, the prince of this world, and then lastly, number three, he is called the prince of the power of the air. In Ephesians 2 verse 2 it says, "In which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience." So his titles, God of this world, prince of this world, and prince of the power of the air. So now let's look at letter D. The origin of Satan. Satan's origin can basically be divided into two different sections. The first is his unfallen state. This unfallen state of Satan, Lucifer, is described in Ezekiel 28 verses 12 through 15. In Ezekiel 28 verses 12 through 15 it says, "You were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle, and crafted in gold were your settings and your engravings. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones of fire you walked. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created, till unrighteousness was found in you." So that describes Satan's unfallen state as a beautiful creation of God. And then number two, his fallen state is described in Isaiah 14 verses 12 through 15 and Ezekiel 28 verses 15 through 17. And those passages we've already looked at already. This is when Satan says in his heart he will ascend to God, he will take the throne, and all the wills that he says he will do, and then the destruction that came because of that. So now let's look at letter E. What is the nature and sphere of Satan? What is his nature? Well, number one, he's wicked. 1 John chapter 5 verse 18 says, "We know that everyone who has been born of God does not keep on sinning, but he who was born of God protects him, and the evil one does not touch him." The word evil one there literally means wicked one. So not only is he wicked, but number two, he is mighty. How mighty is he? He's so mighty that in Jude 9, when Michael goes to get the bones of Moses and Lucifer comes to do the same, Michael, realizing how powerful Lucifer is, instead of fighting him face to face, he rebukes him in the name of the Lord, and Satan has to leave. So he is wicked. He is mighty. Number three, he is shrewd and cunning. Satan is not only the object of the world's worship, but he's also the moving spirit of all of its godless activities. Let's look at Ephesians chapter 6 verses 11 and 12. In this passage it says that we should put on the whole armor of God. Why? That we may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil, because we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Our issue is not with people, but it's against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. The issues we have with human beings on this earth are orchestrated by Satan himself. And then number four, he tempts men. One of the most popular and famous passages in Genesis 3 is when Satan tempts Adam and Eve. Matthew 4 would be when Satan tempts Jesus himself. And of course, 1 Thessalonians 3 is the basic command for us to be on guard and watch, because he is going to try to tempt us. And then number 5, he oppresses Christians. How does he oppress us? In 1 Peter 5, Peter tells us that he's like a roaring lion, roaming about seeking whom he may devour. He wants nothing more than to hurt Christians. And number 6, he accuses man before God. One of the most popular passages of him doing this is in Job chapter 1. In Job 1, he accuses Job of only following God because of everything God has given him. And that sets off a lot of details that go into Satan taking so much from Job and Job still praising God. Then number 7, he also blinds men to the truth. He tries to keep individuals from coming to the knowledge of Jesus and the truth of the gospel. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verses 3 and 4 says, "And even if our gospel is veiled or hidden, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God." And then lastly, number 8, he opposes the word of God. In Mark chapter 4, this is the parable of the sower and the seed. When Jesus gives this parable, he further explains that when the seed goes out onto the ground, into the road, the birds come and eat it up. He later tells the disciples privately that those birds represent the devils, those that oppose God, those fallen angels. They come and try to take away the word of God from people's hearts so they will not get planted and see them get saved. And lastly, letter F. What is the destiny of Satan? Well, this can be broken down into 2 parts. Number 1, Christ bruised Satan on the cross. When Jesus died, this was that fatal head wound that was prophesied in Genesis 3 verse 15. When Satan hurt the heel of woman, God predicted that her seed would hurt the head of Lucifer. So yes, Satan did hurt mankind, but it was like a foot wound. When Jesus hurt Satan, it was that head wound. And then number 2, Satan's final defeat will come at the end of the millennium. Eschatologically, which is a topic we'll get into next semester, we find that Satan, after the tribulation, after the second coming, and after that battle of Armageddon, Satan will be cast into the abyss for a period of 1,000 years. And then he will be released and allowed to deceive the nations one last time. And a final battle of the Gog and Magog rebellion will take place, and Lucifer will be cast into the lake of fire. Well, that brings us to the end of this lecture, and it's just as a reminder, test number 5 will be in the next class period, and it will cover the nature of God from page 35 all the way through that entire section of creation that ends on page 46. Thanks for listening to Lecture 24 for BIB201, Bible Doctrines 1. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or you need anything, please do not hesitate to contact me.